Welcome to the Superpowers for Good show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. Sanam Naraghi Anderlini, founder of the International Civil Society Action Network, is a peace strategist who has worked for the past 2 decades to end global and regional conflicts. Joined by program manager Malalai Habibi, they share their pain over the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and their insights about peace building. Sanam, Malalai, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's really a thrill to have you. There's so much going on in the world that you can speak to in a unique and powerful way. Thank you very much for making the time to come and visit with us. These are difficult times, I think. Sanam, why don't you just take a minute and provide some context for our discussion today?
Good afternoon, good morning. Thank you very much for having us. The context is it's September 16th. It's a month since the fall of Kabul to the hands of the Taliban. It's about 2.5 weeks since the US, under President Biden, decided to withdraw its troops ahead of time, ahead of the original schedule, so August 31st as opposed to September 11th. And leave in its wake a massive vacuum. And, you know, vacuums and black holes get filled with very nasty people and things. And so we are left with, we are now in the dealing with a situation where the people that we work with in Afghanistan, and I can explain more about our organization, but the people that we work with who are overwhelmingly Afghan women-led local organizations doing peacebuilding work. People who are working in their communities to prevent violence against women and children, to deal with the prevention of Taliban recruitment, to train local police, to be good at doing community policing. People like that, women, I should say, which is not your sort of the normal way we think about women doing development work. We often think about girls' education or health care and, you know, small livelihood type programs. These are transformative people. They are superheroes in their own context. And yet what we've done is, by not really having a strong strategic vision in the diplomacy that we did with the Taliban, by not having Afghan women present in the talks themselves to engage directly about the future and about their demands and about things like protection of civilians and so forth. By stonewalling Afghan women for many years across many administrations, we have now left them. And not only we've left them behind, but we've also left behind countless weapons that is now in the hands of the Talib. We left behind equipment, biodata. When the US emptied out of Bagram Airport at 3 a.m. in the morning in July, instead of doing a handover to the local Afghan commanders to say, here's the equipment and here's what we have, and here are the cars and uniforms and, as I say, the weapons, our forces left. And they left behind the prisoners. And so all of the prisons have been opened. And anybody who was in prison for whatever kind of crime, including a lot of murder and violence and rape, is now out. And the people that we interact with, which is, as I say, our community workers who do this kind of work, or the prosecutors or the judges or the police officers, are now calling us or writing to us. Some people we know, some people we don't know, asking for help because they are at risk and people are looking for them for reprisals. And the Taliban that's taken over, with whom the United States negotiated, now suggests that they're offering reassurances for women's rights, but they're not. So that's the context in which we are doing our work. And ICAN as an organization works with women's peace organizations in over 40 countries. But to be faced with the reality that our government and our allies together created one of the worst security, humanitarian, sort of violations of human rights conditions and situations on the ground in a country, and it sits with us. That's a heavy burden to be carrying for those of us who are in the United States and trying to help.
Yeah. What are you doing now to try and save the lives of these people you've been working with? Tell us a little bit about the activities you're undertaking right now today.
The activities vary. They range from committing to them, even though we don't know, as I say, I don't necessarily know the people who write to me, but they write in Persian and Farsi, which is my mother tongue. And my commitment to myself for my own sanity and my own humanity, and to them, is that anybody who writes to me, I will respond to them, just to say I'm here, just to say we are sorry and that we are thinking about them and that we are trying in whatever way possible to help alleviate the conditions on the ground through our advocacy, but also where and when possible to think about how to help them out. I'm connected to a network of people like myself in small organizations, in academia, or in bigger organizations, but actually working kind of on the side because our governments are not really part of this effort in a systematic way. Talking to them and figuring out the strangest things. So right now, different governments are interested in different types of people. The French are interested in artists and musicians. So if an artist or a musician or a writer comes, we say, well, who do we know in France who can be talking to them? And could suggest these. Some other government is interested in the judges and the prosecutors and the lawyers. And so it's like, so when a judge comes to me, I contact my friend in another country and I say, hey, I've got another judge for you. Police officers. At the moment, we are dealing with incredible sense of fear and insecurity amongst especially women in the police force, women who were trained by us, by NATO, who have certificates from all of our fancy institutions and who have been forgotten and forsaken and who are now being chased down. So I'm trying to reach out to as many governments that we can get hold of. These people need visas to be able to leave. To be able to cross the border to Pakistan, they need a visa to a third country. Every day I beg the United Kingdom, the United States, other European countries, please, will you issue these people visas? I'm talking to airlines to say, will you give us discounted flights as and when flights start so that we can start to get people out in family groups to other countries, because certain countries in Latin America are now saying, we'll take some of these folks on a humanitarian visa. But then they come with a caveat because they say, we'll take them on a temporary basis until they're resettled somewhere else, so long as you pay for them. Again, I run a small organization. I'm not a humanitarian organization. And I'm now having to think about how do I raise the funds and process and manage the possibility of, say, 500 Afghans, if we're lucky, 200 families or 100 families, if we're lucky, being able to get to the airport in Kabul, get on a plane and get out and go somewhere else, in the hope that our bureaucracies will process their papers and let them come and live, and create a new life somewhere else.
Yeah. It's incredibly difficult work, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Malalai, how are you engaged in this process as a program manager?
Yeah, so actually I'm engaged in different bases. I'm from Afghanistan, and it's been a few years that I'm in US. I'm engaged personally as well as being engaged at professional level, but I also engaged emotionally because I also have years of refugee experience in Iran. I was living in Iran as refugee, so now I very well understand the plights and the difficulties of these people. At the very best chance, if they get any opportunity to get out of the country, still it's not a solution for them, and still it's not the best thing that could happen to them. And days and nights I'm thinking of why we are here, why this happened to my people, why this happened to my country. I'm hearing so many different things, some people even saying that these people just wanted to get out of the country and looking for a better chance. But the bigger question is that what we did that now they feel like to even hang off from the airplane and try to take the most dangerous way to just get out of the country, because the situation is so dire, because everything is taken from them, because the Taliban has been imposed to them, and because of all this mismanagement and all this inconsistency, and actually I just want to say because of all the lies that the international community told my people, and honestly I feel like we are betrayed. And that this is not, I think that majority of the Afghan people share the same feeling with me. And yes, I'm really speechless. And what I'm seeing, I can't believe it. I can't digest it. I can't believe that all those human laws, all those well written and well drafted uh, resolutions and statements are just words, empty words, and no one, especially international community, isn't walking what they are talking.
Yeah, I can only imagine how you must feel. Perhaps you can help me and others understand something, Malalai, that many of us, I think, draw a parallel between the last 20 years of the U.S.-led involvement in Afghanistan to the Soviet occupation in the 80s. And it seemed to me, and I think others, that the Afghani people were strong, resilient, and we were thrilled when the Afghani people rejected and threw out the Soviet invaders. Now we feel like, some of us, that that's what's happened to America, that we have been rejected and thrown out of Afghanistan in a similar way, that we've been rejected by the Afghani people in a similar way. How would you contrast those two experiences? Disabuse me of the idea that those are parallel situations, if they aren't parallel.
So it's not about being rejected. It's mostly about what Afghan people want for themselves. Of course, neither Afghan nor any other country around the world want to be just misused and to be occupied and to be seen as a project, to be seen as, it's since the Soviet era, even before that till now, every other country and every other power has been fighting their own war on our back. And of course, this is not something that we want. So there definitely there will be resistance from the people, and in that resistance and in that environment, so many other groups try to get the advantage of the situation. And we are seeing the proxy wars in Afghanistan. We are seeing the vacuum that has been created, filled by other opportunistic players of this game. Yeah.
Sanam, what would you add to that?
I would say two things. I think the narrative that is being frankly sold to the American audience is a very false narrative. This was not a civil war. It is not a civil war. It never was a civil war. This is multiple layers of complexity, because you have a Pakistan-India competition being played on Afghan soil. You have the US's own war on terror that was being played out there. And if we think about 9/11 and in the world at the time, there were about 5,000, terrorists or affiliates of Al Qaeda. The way that we have prosecuted that supposed war on terror, there are now hundreds of thousands, right? So these are our mistakes that we are perpetuating. Now, in the case of what happened in Afghanistan, the question again, to me, this is more around a lens on our political leadership and our diplomatic efforts and how those interests were played out. Because from the outset, we worked with certain Afghan figures, including Mr. Khalilzad, who remains the U.S. envoy. We worked with Pakistan, who was the neighbor. The Taliban, there was a rejection of having the Taliban in the, weakened Taliban in the formation of the government back in 2001. They then retreat and they go to Pakistan. We continue to give aid to Pakistan. We turn a blind eye to the fact that the Taliban is kind of regaining strength over there, right? So that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that on the ground, through the years that we were there, the people who made there are two things that went on. On the one hand, American contractors made trillions of dollars. So much of the money that was supposedly dedicated to Afghanistan was actually just recycled back into American pockets and companies here. But what's worse than that is that we never actually listened to what Afghans themselves were saying about what they need in terms of development and what they need in terms of livelihoods and safety and security, because people don't want to go become a Talib. People go join a Taliban because it's income, because it might give them a modicum of protection. If we can go back and look at the almost insane kind of reports that we have of, we went into Helmand and people were growing popium and poppies and for opium purposes. At the time, there was a suggestion that why don't we buy that opium for the medical market globally? We need that. But no, we were ideologically against it. So we destroy their crop, which means that we destroy their livelihoods. And we had a consultant that goes out and says they can grow cotton. And the Afghans are saying, yes, we'll grow cotton. But then somebody here turns around and goes, oh no, we have a law that says we can't support growing cotton in another country because that's in competition with our cotton farmers in the United States. There is an insanity about this. And these stories go on and on. So we failed. We didn't give the farmer, and we destroyed his poppy crop. We don't give him an alternative. What is he left with? He was left with, or he as a character, but they're left with debt to the guy who had already bought the crop for the drugs. And the way they pay back that debt at some point was giving their young daughters in marriage or as a payment for the debt. So that's one thing that the second thing is the next round, they say, well, we'll grow this stuff. And the Talib says, we'll protect you. And now they have an income. So the way that we addressed these issues is so problematic. The level of corruption that we introduced into that country, bags and bags of cash by the CIA, paying off warlords, all along for 20 years, Afghan women peacebuilders and Afghan citizens who were working to build their country and were taking that moment of time to actually build something, were warning against these things. And they were saying, please listen to us, work with us. We as in the United States, whether it's the political, and I don't think it's fair to blame the military entirely. The military does what it does, and they are a hammer, basically. But they were also instrumentalized by our political administrations across the different government administrations that we have. So it's a failure on multiple levels. And yet within all this time that the fighting was going on and so forth, actually ordinary people were given the space. They went to school. There are judges, there are lawyers, there is a wealth of media and journalism and arts and culture, like in any country. Ordinary people, you give them, peace is our norm. War is not the norm. And even in the time of war, people are still fighting for normality. And this was created there. The country is 62% of the country is under the age of 25. They don't even remember pre-Taliban. Over 40% are under 14. It's a country of children. That's what it is. And what did we do? We sat in Doha. Our diplomats sat in Doha and negotiated with the Taliban and handed the country over to them. And the implications of it are profound. Not just for Afghans. I mean, Afghans are at the epicenter of this, and Afghan women specifically, and the minorities. But the implications of what we've done are beyond anything that any of us can imagine, because it's like saying 76 years of human rights and values that have been the superpower of the United States. That's been our real superpower of this country. I'm Iranian. I grew up during the Shah's time. And why did we aspire, or why did we look to the US and not to the USSR? It was the values. That's what inspires people, because there's a universality around that. All of that now has been discredited. And let me just give you an example. When the evacuation was going on, a British man was allowed to evacuate his 200 stray cats and dogs that he had in a shelter. We couldn't get Afghan women through the gates of the airport to bring them out. So how can we talk about human rights?
Yeah. Was that the Taliban preventing them from getting into the airport?
No, it was the United States. It was the United States closing the gates. It was the United States saying Afghan nationals can't be at the airport after the attacks at the gates. And it was the United States closing the gate to its own allies who were bringing people in. So those people that we were trying to get in through other European countries got stuck there.
Yeah. Now, the U.S. did evacuate well over 100,000 Afghanis. What's your reaction to that?
I think people are being processed, and I think it'll be interesting to know who is there and who's not, and how many, and frankly, good luck to the people that made it, who in principle wouldn't have made it, but they made it through the crowds and so forth. I think if you look at the ratios or the images, certainly from what we've seen, there's an overwhelming preponderance of men, because the women that we were working with who have their children were not going to go into those crowds with little kids and risk being trampled over and harassed and so forth. A lot of the women who really genuinely should be out were not, because of the way that the evacuation was done. We have people who were promised to be put on convoys and they were not. So there's not, it's hard to explain. It didn't have to be this way. The politics didn't have to be this way. The diplomacy didn't have to be this way. The evacuation certainly didn't have to be this way. And we have left behind some of the most extraordinary people. And one way that I would maybe describe this is that maybe the reason why people have been left behind is that in Washington, Afghanistan was described always as a war, the theater of war. And we helped those who helped us in our war. But Afghanistan is a country. And there were people living there who were neither on the side of wanting to make war on behalf of the United States or war on behalf of the Taliban. They were living their lives trying to build peace, actually, which is what most of us do. And it was people like us who were ignored and who have been marginalized and who have been silenced and now have been literally put in a open de facto prison because the borders are closed and the Taliban are now looking for them. So we haven't valued peace, we haven't valued rights, we haven't valued those who were genuinely working for their country.
And also, let's not forget about those who could make it out. They are not experiencing their best days. So I see that in media they are trying to depict it as a very successful evacuation plan, but honestly it wasn't, for all the reasons that Sanam Jan said, but also even for those who could make it out. The camps that they are in, the situation is not good at all. The food, the everything. I mean, it is far from a successful evacuation plan. They are overcrowded. The food is so bad. I was speaking with some of them, and they even still are in the clothes that they left Kabul with. They even do not have access to clothes. and and
Yeah.
and the long run program also, what I'm hearing is that the government only is providing them support for 3 months, and after that they are just leaving them alone. And God knows what will happen to them. God knows what will happen to a illiterate young guy with five small kids.
Yeah. Yeah. These are scary times. I'd like to shift. I know this is a topic we could talk about endlessly, but I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about ICAN. Sanam, tell us about this organization that you have founded and organized and lead. It's well respected. You spoke not long ago to the United Nations General Assembly. You're a big deal. Tell us about what you have done with ICAN.
Thank you. I'm not sure how big a deal I really am. It's we're trying. We do what we can is basically our motto. So the idea behind ICAN is that precisely because when conflict and war breaks out around the world over the 25 years that I've been doing this work, we find that certain people, and I do genuinely call them superheroes, in plain clothing or in plain sight, emerge. Very often they're women, and they, instead of running away from the problem, they run to the problem. So whether it's in Yemen and trying to get, they start often with humanitarian aid and trying to say, well, these kids need feeding, or we have to mediate to get access for humanitarian aid to get through, or people have gone missing. Let's go look for them. They've been abducted. Let's go look for them. So instead of running away from all of that, all the things that make the rest of us afraid or people are afraid of, they run to the problem to say, what can they do? These people often evolve and emerge into becoming the peace builders of their community, being the bridge between government and militias and talking to, just trying to sort of find solutions. And it's a very lonely area of work because it's very easy to demonize the other side. It's very easy to duck your head down and say, okay, I'm only going to do children's education, for example, right? Or I'm only going to do, women's sewing circles. But to actually sort of say, no, to make things happen, we need to talk to each other and we need to have reduce the hate. And we need to learn how to dialogue across our differences and so forth and find common solutions. Not many people do this work. It's lonely. As I say, it's very dangerous. And what we've done at ICAN is I've created a network, and we have in over 40 countries, over 90 organizations, all of them women-led, working with men, many of them, of course, that do this kind of work. And so the way that we think about it is that we have, on a personal level, we try and offer solidarity to people. Since COVID, every week we have a half an hour, 1 hour call, and just from Cameroon to Nigeria to Yemen to Colombia to Afghanistan, people talk to each other across contexts. So the solidarity level, we have a kind of a professional level where we say, well, these are such extraordinary people; they need to be heard, and fellowship prizes. The opportunity to speak in international fora at the UN Security Council. Last week, we had a colleague speaking, and so forth, so that their voices and perspectives are heard and hopefully respected. And then we have a fund called the Innovative Peace Fund, where we give grants to them. And the model that we have is that we trust their judgment. We know what they need on the ground. And we may help and say, well, here's a better way, or here's a different strategy, but they will tell us what the issue is, and we trust their judgment in terms of what they think the need is. We don't tell them what they should be doing. This is the kind of the model that we have, which is very much about being locally rooted and globally connected. And in my own work, going back 25 years, I was involved. I started this work when I was in my 20s. And I was involved in a global campaign that led to the first UN Security Council resolution on women, peace, and security that is kind of a common vocabulary and a kind of recognized agenda for this type of work. As I say, at the moment, the Afghan situation is putting a light and a big question mark on genuinely how much our governments abide by the rule of law, their own laws.
Mm-hmm.
But what we know is that on the ground, there is a universal and kind of timeless element to this issue of wanting peace, building peace, stepping into that space and being those kinds of bridges and connectors.
Malalai, what inspired you to join ICAN?
So I started with ICAN in 2018 as an intern, and then I was amazed by the work that we are doing. Actually, in that time, they were doing at ICAN. I was somehow familiar with other organizations, very big think tanks in Washington D.C. that with millions of dollars they were working and issuing reports and issuing papers, but I was amazed by the level of effects and impacts ICAN was having in very grassroots and women-led organizations around the world, and with such a small team. And then I'm so grateful that I could start working with them, and since then I've been engaged in the amazing work at a very, very grassroots levels.
Oh, that's fantastic. Sanam, what is your superpower?
What is my superpower? Sometimes I think that my superpower is, the power of the powerless is speaking truth to power. So being true to what's going on, and maintaining that integrity and maintaining that commitment and care and respect for our partners. So partly it's recognizing that, I wish I had more power, and we have power in strange ways in terms of trying to shift things, but what drives us is care, the power of caring, the power of imagination, that things can be done differently, and coming up with those ideas. It's amazing how unimaginative people are. The power of the can-do, why not? I am allergic to people who say, I'm sorry, I can't, and I won't. I've never been able to tolerate that kind of attitude. Empathy. And again, going back to what Malalai was saying, I was 11 when the Iranian Revolution happened. Overnight, our lives just disappeared. Literally, my life, it was like you go to sleep in one life and then you're waking up in a completely different life. And so to know what that means for other people, to know what it means to fight for your country, these are the factors that kind of keep me going. But I think, sometimes I think maybe we are kind of an endangered species that actually still believe in collective work and these core values of human rights and the belief in peace, actually, that peace is what we should be, which is what most people want, and they will do a lot to sustain it, and somehow we've been overtaken by this glorification of violence.
Yeah. Malalai, what's your superpower?
So I would like to speak about it not as an individual, but as part of a group, the group of women peacebuilders whose superpower is building peace. I have always been inspired by those women who are building peace in the most dangerous conflict zones under harshest situation. I am personally pro-peace, and I worked for peace in Afghanistan and Iran, and I'm also coming from a educational background in peace studies. I did my international peace study master degree in University of Notre Dame, but yet my superpower is actually derived from women peacebuilders around the world. um, it's not about, I mean, I am humbled by seeing those who work for peace on the ground, and peace building is their profession amidst war and conflict. It's not about being modest. I'm just trying to acknowledge and recognize the work of those who choose to be peace builder, not because they might be paid better or because the term might seem sexier, but just because they are passionate about it. And this is they often pay a significant cost for that, either by their own lives or by the lives of the one that they love. And this is really important. Like in my work at ICAN, for example, I know a woman peace builder who is conducting peace building shuras or council, and constantly takes the courage to speak with the most notorious insurgents groups and trying to bridge the gap, trying to speak with them and try to open a dialogue. And I see her I see a kind of great superpower in her. And I know a woman who runs foundation working on cultural peace and producing a strategic knowledge and tools. She's producing books and pieces on women's rights, human rights, transitional justice. And it's been few days that I heard that she has to actually burn around 19,000 books because she feared that if Taliban get hold of them, it would be so dangerous for she and her team. And hearing about that was very heart wrenching for me. And but at the same time, I know that how much powerful they are, and how source of superpower they are. And actually, again, my superpower is being part of this great group of women. Yeah.
So, Malalai, how did you learn and how can others learn to be peace builders?
So again, this is something I think this is very personal. First of all, I just don't want to single myself out and say we are peace builders, others not. Every person can be and has the potential to be peace builders if they want and if they just look around critically. I think this is a time that we all have to look around us critically. There are so many things that you can know that so many things going on which has nothing to do with peace. And it's a time for us, for I don't know, for those who work in civil society, those who work in academia, those celebrities, even those politicians, to know that it's a time that you should do something which is more about peace rather than waging war. And as Sanam Jan also said, for me, it was more a personal path. My parents, and then all my life, myself and my brothers have been going through place to place, have been experiencing the war and its byproducts, which is discrimination, which is marginalizations, which is deprivation. I personally was excluded from normal education because I was undocumented refugee. The same for my brothers, the same for my friends, and the same for my generation, the whole generation. And seeing those, my first and foremost feeling is that as a human being, I do not want to see that happen to my kids, to other kids, especially that we are in 21st century. And whatever is happening, you shouldn't see that someone is deprived from the very basic rights, which is education, or even which is the rights to life. You see that, yeah, you see that people, I'm just speaking about Afghanistan, very very young kids are lying on the ground in streets. And this is really heartbreaking. And as a human being, I just want to try my best to at least solve a very tiny part of it. And I don't know if we can call it being a peace builder or whatever, but this is, at this moment, this is the duty of every one of us.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that was profound, Malalai. Thank you. Sanam, I wonder if you would just comment for a minute about how you learned and how others can learn to speak truth to power. I think it takes courage and strength, but much more than that. How do people learn to do that?
That's a very good question. I wanted to just talk about the peace building part, which maybe is related to the question that you're asking also, is that, if we think about this country and we think about what happened in the elections, and all of my American friends, when I asked them, their families were split down the middle. Everybody had either if you were a Biden supporter, you had a Trump supporter in your family, very close. And what I found extraordinary was that in the 4 years that the Trump administration was in power, most people didn't have the courage to sit and talk to each other around the table. Because God forbid we end up having divisions. So it was papering it over. What peace builders do is they have the courage to sit down and face the other side, to look for the humanity, to see the other's truth, because we all have a truth, right? And it's not necessarily to say, I'm going to bulldoze over you. And, it's more about saying, let me listen to you. Let me hear what you're saying, and let's find where we come together. And this is something that I've learned over the years from my own experience, again, from the Iranian context, of seeing that it's very easy to constantly say, I'm against this and I'm against that, and these are all bad people, and think about everything in a sort of two-dimensional way, and put myself above it all. But the truth of it is that doesn't do anybody any good. And so it's that question of saying, are we willing to engage? Are you willing to respect my humanity and my values? And am I willing to respect yours? And then where do we find some commonality? And one of the things that I found is that everything that is, so much of the discourse, whether we like it or not, is framed around what we don't want. And this comes back to your question, how do you speak truth to power? Well, the war on terror, the war on drugs, the war on this, these are all, we're against something. My question, and the way that I've always looked at it, is, what are we for? Let's talk about, what do I stand for? What's my vision? In 5 years' time, what do we want? What do I want the country to look like? What do I want for my family? What do you want for your family? And what's your nightmare? The minute you humanize this, you see how much we have in common with each other. I've done research with, and through the years that I've done this work, I've talked to militias in Liberia. I've talked to gang members in Jamaica. I've talked to Taliban leaders in other places. You ask that question. You stand with a bunch of Jamaican gang members and say to them, what are you worried about? What do you want? And the answer that I got from a bunch of these guys was, well, we have children and we want them to be educated and well-spoken and have good table manners. I have children. They were 4 years old, 5 years old at the time that I went to Jamaica to do this research. And all of a sudden, this guy and I had something to talk about. Now, he may have guns under his bed, and that might be his only way to make a livelihood, and I'm anti-weapons. But the point was, we started somewhere, and then we get to the point where he's telling me about how he wants his chicken coop and how the other guy needs his bike to be able to do deliveries. People on the ground, in any country, ordinary people just want dignity. They want respect, and they want to be able to live their lives. They are being so exploited by people sitting in their armchairs far removed, using them, whether they're using them as soldiers in national armies, whether they're using them in gangs, whether they're using them on militias. But our young people are being exploited by a bunch of people and who don't care about their lives. And to the extent that I have the power to speak, I will raise these issues. And to end maybe one additional thought is that the right to freedom of expression isn't just a right, it's a responsibility. When you've come from a country where freedom of expression lands you in jail or can mean death, and then you come here, or you come to a place where they claim freedom of expression as a core value, I don't see it as just a right. I see it as my responsibility to speak and to provide the spaces for others to speak as well. And when you, all of a sudden, when you speak, somehow it gives the courage to others to actually raise up their voice and say, hey, I relate to that as well.
Yeah. That is great. That is really great insight. And I appreciate you sharing all of that. It's really a deep significance to think about how you, as different a person as one can imagine from a Jamaican gang leader, finding common ground and beginning a dialogue from that spot, that point of common ground, is really a great example to all of us. Well, listen, I want to thank you both. We've gone well over the time that I'd promised for you, and I apologize for that, but I've been wanting to hear what you have to say, and I appreciate you saying it. Before we go, Sanam, I want to ask you to tell people how people can learn more about ICAN and the work you're doing. And Malalai, I want you to introduce us to your son before we wrap up. So he's been participating in this podcast all along, so we want to make sure that he's well introduced before we adjourn, if you're okay with that. So Sanam, tell us about ICAN,
Sure.
and then Malalai, you can introduce us to your son.
Thank you. You can learn more about ICAN from our website, icanpeacework.org. And you can follow us on Twitter the handle is @WhatTheWomenSay. My handle is Sanam BNA on Twitter. We're on Instagram and Facebook. We are doing a fundraising call now to help our Afghan partners and those that have come to us, either for staying in Afghanistan or for their transition if we're able to get them evacuated. So we would welcome your support. But more than anything else, I often say, put your mouth where your money is. The more people we have actually raising the concerns and the issues that we have, writing to your senators and your congressmen saying, we care about this, it matters. That is often more than its weight in gold, to be honest with you. So thank you very much. Thanks for giving us this chance.
Yeah.
Thank you. Malalai,
Ben,
introduce us to your son.
Ben, come here. No, now he doesn't want.
Now he doesn't want to be on the show.
He just wanted to be here, to be present during our speaking, but now he doesn't want.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're glad you've had him along for the ride. Thank you very, very much. I want to encourage you, congratulate you for the great work you're doing in peace building, and encourage you to keep it up. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for taking time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
All righty. Let's do some good.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Superpowers for Good show. Twice each week, we host changemakers who share their impact, insights, and superpowers. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today at superpowersforgood.com. That's superpowers, 4, good.com. Be super empowered. Get your copy of the book, Superpowers for Good, as an ebook, audiobook, paperback, or hardcover edition via your favorite online retailer. Interested in having me speak to your company, organization, or association? Visit devonthorpe.com. Then let's talk. Now, keep using your superpowers for good. Together, we can reverse climate change, improve global health, and eradicate poverty.